After the Battle of Zama, Scipio proceeded to storm Hannibal's camp, where he seized an immense amount of plunder. He then set sail with his fleet to the great harbor of Carthage. A Carthaginian delegation soon approached Scipio to sue for peace. Quote, as he was approaching the harbor, he was met by a vessel hung with bands of white wool and branches of olives. In it were the 10 foremost men of the state, who, on Hannibal's advice, had been sent as an embassy to sue for peace. As soon as they were near the stern of the general's vessel, they held up the suppliant emblems. And making appeals to Scipio for his pity and protection, the only reply was that they were to go to Tunis, as Scipio was about to move his army to that place. End quote. The Romans soon learned that Vermina, the son of the captured Numidian king Syphax, was coming to the aid of Carthage. Surely Hannibal must have wondered where this army was when he needed them most at Zama. In any event, Scipio's deputy, Octavius, decided he could not leave a large force unopposed so close to Carthage, and so he marched out to meet Vermina. Quote, Octavius attacked the Numidians while on the march with a portion of his infantry and the cavalry. It soon ended in the utter rout of the Numidians. As they were completely surrounded by the Roman cavalry, all avenues of escape were closed. 15,000 were killed and 1,200 taken prisoner. 1,500 horses were also secured and 72 standards. Vermina himself escaped with a few horsemen. The Romans then reoccupied their old position at Tunis. End quote. With the break in the action, Scipio now looked to secure a peace treaty with Carthage. Livy indicates that he was also concerned his successor might come in and claim all the glory of ending the war. So he leaned towards making peace with the Carthaginians. When the envoys arrived from Carthage, Scipio stated the terms, which was effectively an unconditional surrender. Carthage would not be razed, but would be stripped of their overseas possessions, including some provinces in Africa. They were also to pay a war indemnity of 10,000 talents of silver, in annual installments over a 50-year period. Their navy would be reduced to just 10 triremes. The Romans also took control over Carthage's foreign policy, as they were not allowed to make war either within or beyond the frontiers of Africa without the express permission of Rome. Carthage was also required to send corn back to Rome and pay some of Rome's auxiliaries. 100 hostages were to be handed over to Scipio, who would handle the selection process. And last but not least, Rome could not forget about those war elephants that had done so much damage over the decades to Rome's infantry. Carthage was permitted to keep their current elephants, but they were forbidden to train new ones. By himself, Scipio could not ratify the peace treaty. That would need to be finished in Rome, by the Roman Senate and Carthaginian envoys. Although Scipio could not finalize the peace treaty, he did have the authority to grant a truce. But in order for that to happen, he made 2 demands. First, several transports had been seized by Carthage's navy during the previous truce. All of the property taken from the ships needed to be restored. And until the peace treaty was ratified, Carthage could not send envoys to any city except Rome. If any foreign envoys arrived at Carthage, they would not be allowed to leave until the Roman commander had been informed of the nature of their visit. With Scipio's demands made clear, the Carthaginian envoys returned to present them to their government. There was outrage at the heavy demands, and many senators and citizens wanted to reject the terms. Hannibal then rose to speak. Quote, I left you when I was 9 years old, and now after a 36 years absence, I have returned. The art of war which I have been taught from my boyhood, first as a private soldier, and then in high command, I think I am fairly well acquainted with. The rules and laws and customs of civic life, and of the forum, I must learn from you. End quote. After apologizing to the politicians for his lack of experience, Hannibal implored them to accept the terms. In fact, he said it was a necessity, since the army was completely decimated. And so at Hannibal's urging, Carthage finally accepted the Roman demands for peace. The only issue was this business of the Roman transports. The ships were found to have been completely emptied of their contents, so it was unknown what exactly they contained. It was left to Scipio to put a value on what was missing, and the Carthaginians agreed to pay the amount in cash. Scipio ordered the quartermaster to make an inventory of both the missing government and private property. The owners of the private property would also be notified. In the end, Carthage paid 25,000 pounds of silver to make amends. The truce was then granted, and delegations were dispatched to Rome. Livy writes what happened next. Quote, on the arrival of the Roman commissioners from Africa, simultaneously with that of the Carthaginians, the Senate met at the Temple of Bellona. The Roman officer Veturius reported that Carthage had made her last effort. A battle had been fought with Hannibal, and an end had at last been put to this disastrous war. This announcement was received by the senators with huge delight. Veturius was then ordered to go to the assembly and share the good news with the people of Rome. Amidst universal congratulations, all the temples in the city were thrown open, and public thanksgivings were ordered for 3 days. End quote. In 201 BC, Scipio finally returned from Africa. He was granted a well-deserved triumph through the streets of Rome. Livy describes the event. Quote, as peace was now established on land and sea, Scipio embarked his army and sailed to Sicily. From there he sent the greater part of his army on in the ships, while he himself traveled throughout Italy. The country was rejoicing quite as much over the restoration of peace as over the victory he had won. And he made his way to Rome through multitudes, who poured out from the cities to do him honor, and crowds of peasants blocked the roads in the country districts. The triumphal procession in which he rode into the city was the most brilliant that had ever been seen. The weight of silver which he brought into the treasury amounted to 123,000 pounds. Out of the booty he distributed 40 bronze coins to each soldier. As to the nickname of Africanus, whether it was conferred upon him by the devotion of his soldiers, or by popular breath, or whether, as in recent instances of Sulla and Pompey the Great, it originated in the flattery of his friends, I cannot say for certain. At all events, he was the first commander-in-chief who was ennobled by the name of the people he had conquered. Since his time, men who have won far smaller victories have in imitation of him left splendid inscriptions on their busts and illustrious names to their families. End quote. As for Hannibal, he remained in Carthage to work on reforming the government. He would find that as challenging as any battle plan he ever drew up. I discussed that in the link in the description of this video. And as for the series, we will continue on with the Second Macedonian War in the next video.